The alien queen expected me to pick one of them, not her. Sci-Fi Story HFY. The hall was so large that Elia's rook could not see its end. The ceiling curved upward like the inside of a planet, glowing softly with lights that changed color as different species moved beneath them. Thousands of aliens filled the space. Some stood tall like towers of metal and flesh. Some floated. Some crawled. Some looked almost human, which made Elias more uncomfortable than the ones that looked like monsters. He walked alone. That was part of the design. Humanity had lost the border war, not because they were weak, but because the Galactic Coalition had decided the war should end before humans learned too much. The fighting had been short, brutal, and one-sided. When it ended, the Coalition did not demand land or resources. They demanded a tradition. The selection. Elias had studied the rules for weeks. He knew them better than the aliens expected a human to. One representative of the defeated species would enter the Hall of Thousand Species and choose a single individual from the coalition. That individual would become the bonded representative, a symbol of submission and cooperation. In truth, it was a reminder to every weaker race that resistance had a cost. Most species chose a warrior or a noble or a political figure who would watch over them like a handler. It was supposed to be obvious, predictable. Elias reached the center of the hall and stopped on the glowing circle marked for him. The noise slowly faded. Thousands of eyes turned toward him. Some were curious, some were amused, some already looked bored as if the outcome was decided. He felt small. He was human after all. No armor. No weapons, just a simple uniform and the weight of an entire planet on his shoulders. A voice echoed through the hall, translated instantly into his mind. Human representative, you may begin your selection. Telepathic elders whose thoughts pressed against his mind like deep water. This was what the coalition expected him to see: power, fear, obedience. But Elias had learned something during the war. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest. They were not the most advanced. But they noticed things others ignored. Slowly, Elias lifted his gaze upward. At the highest level of the hall, above all others, sat the Virelan Queen, Queen Zyra. She rested on a living throne grown from crystal and organic metal. Her form was tall and elegant, her four eyes calm and bright. Her presence alone silenced those near her. She was ancient, powerful, one of the founding rulers of the coalition. She was not a candidate. She was never meant to be. A ripple of confusion spread through the hall as Elias kept looking at her. Alien minds whispered to one another. Some laughed softly. Others tilted their heads in confusion. The voice returned. Human, your choice must be among the presented candidates. I choose Queen Zyra of the Virelan Dominion. That is not possible. The queen is not eligible. The hall grew quieter as the truth became impossible to deny. There was no rule against choosing a ruler. Queen Zyra moved for the first time. She rose from her throne, her movements smooth and unhurried. Her gaze fixed on Elias, not with anger but with interest. No defeated species has ever made such a choice, she said, her voice calm and clear. Do you understand what you are doing, human? Others felt something uncomfortable settle into their thoughts. Queen Zyra studied him for a long moment. Elias felt as if she were peeling him apart layer by layer. Fear, resolve, hope, all of it laid bare. You believe choosing me will protect your species, she said. No, Elias replied. I believe it will change everything. The hall filled with overlapping voices, but the laws did not change. The selection had been made, and by their own rules it could not be refused. Finally, the voice returned, cold and formal. The selection is valid. The throne behind her shifted and dissolved, returning to the living floor. Symbols of authority faded from her form, replaced by the glowing mark of a representative. A ruler stepping down was unheard of. A queen choosing consequence over power was unthinkable. Elias felt the weight of it settle over him. As guards approached to formalize the bond, Queen Zyra stepped down from the platform and stood beside him on the floor of the hall. For the first time, she was at the same level as everyone else. "You have placed us both in danger," she said quietly. Elias nodded. "That was always the plan." The coalition had followed its rules for so long that it had forgotten why they existed. Humans had just reminded them, not with weapons, not with force, but with a choice no one else had been brave enough to make. And somewhere deep within the vast systems of the coalition, the future began to change. The chamber that received Elias Rook and Queen Zyra was small compared to the Hall of Thousand Species, but it felt heavier. The walls were smooth and dark, alive with slow-moving lights that reacted to thought and emotion. This room was meant for binding agreements, not comfort. The air itself seemed to listen. Elias stood near the center, his hands relaxed at his sides though his body was tense. He had walked into battle zones with less uncertainty than this. Across from him stood Queen Zyra, no longer elevated, no longer distant. Without her throne, she seemed different, still powerful but now present in a way she had never been before. Around them, representatives of the coalition appeared as projections or physical forms. Some glowed with artificial intelligence, others pulsed with organic life. All of them were watching closely. "The selection has been confirmed," said the central arbiter, a being made of layered light. "The bond must now be sealed." It shifted shape, adjusting to both of them. Elias felt a light pressure behind his eyes as the system scanned his mind, his memories, his intentions. He did not resist. He had nothing to hide. Queen Zyra felt it too. For the first time in her long life, something reached into her thoughts without permission granted by her own authority. She did not flinch, but the sensation unsettled her. She had always been the one who watched, never the one being examined. The symbol split into two marks and settled gently onto their hands. It did not burn, it did not hurt. It simply existed, binding them by law and consequence. "The bond is complete," the arbiter announced. "From this moment, Queen Zyra holds the status of representative. Her authority as ruler is suspended. Her actions will reflect upon the selected species." They were escorted from the chamber through corridors that shifted and reformed ahead of them. No guards followed closely, but Elias could feel eyes everywhere. The coalition did not trust what it did not understand. As they walked, silence stretched between them. Finally, Queen Zyra spoke. "Your kind is strange. We hear that a lot. If you fail, your species will not be forgiven. I have not stayed in a place like this since before I became queen." Elias was brought before committees who questioned him about human behavior. Queen Zyra sat beside him, listening more than speaking. She noticed something quickly. Humans did not beg. They asked questions. When the coalition demanded promises of obedience, Elias asked for definitions. When they presented conditions, he asked for clarifications. When they tried to corner him with complex legal language, he read it carefully and asked for time. Other species would have agreed just to end the pressure. Humans did not. Queen Zyra began to understand why the war had ended early. In private moments, she spoke with Elias more openly. "The selection was created to teach fear," she said one cycle. "Over time, species learn to limit themselves. They stop imagining change." Others were deeply uncomfortable. A few watched with growing interest. Smaller species, ones that rarely spoke in council, began to pay attention. If a human could choose a queen, what else might be possible? The first real test came sooner than expected. A proposal was placed before the bonded pair. Earth would be required to limit its space expansion to a fixed boundary for 10 cycles. In return, trade access would be granted. On the surface, it was generous. Elias read the fine details. "This clause allows boundary adjustments during security events," he said calmly, "which you define. We cannot agree to this." That night, Queen Zyra stood at the viewing panel of their quarters, watching distant stars drift past. She had ruled for thousands of years. She had believed the system was stable because it was fair. Now she saw the truth. It was stable because no one had ever pushed back from inside. "You changed my position," she said without turning. Elias joined her. "I'm sorry. You gave me sight." Most of the time, the rules were enough. Elias Rook noticed the pattern before anyone else said it aloud. Meetings became longer, documents became thicker, deadlines became tighter. Every request sounded reasonable by itself. Together, they formed a net. Queen Zyra sat beside him during each session, her posture calm, her expression controlled. To the others, she looked unchanged. Inside, she was watching the system she once commanded turn its weight against a single human, and she was not stopping it, not yet. The first sanction came in the form of delayed access. Human supply ships were held in transit under routine inspection. No cargo was seized. No laws were broken. Time was the weapon. Elias read the notices carefully. "They want us to react," he said quietly. "To give them cause," Queen Zyra agreed. Human command on Earth urged caution. Some leaders wanted to comply to ease the pressure. Others trusted Elias' judgment but feared the cost. Elias sent a simple reply to the coalition. Earth would comply fully. Exactly. Human systems adjusted instantly. Supply routes were rerouted through approved corridors. Ships followed inspection protocols down to the smallest detail. Reports were submitted early, formatted precisely as required. The coalition inspectors grew frustrated. There was nothing to punish. Queen Zyra observed the response with growing interest. "You are obeying them," she said, "yet they grow more uneasy." The second test came through law. A proposal was introduced to reclassify humanity's technological status. On paper, it was an upgrade. In practice, it placed humans under stricter oversight, more monitoring, more reporting, less freedom to innovate. Queen Zyra had authored similar proposals in her early reign. "They will expect you to protest emotionally," she said, "or accept quietly." The proposal stalled, not rejected, just delayed. The coalition did not like delays when they were not in control of them. Soon, whispers spread. Humans were manipulating the system. Humans were dangerous. Humans needed to be contained. Queen Zyra heard these whispers and felt something unexpected. Pride, not in her empire, in the human beside her, but pride was dangerous. The coalition escalated again. A review committee was formed to examine the validity of the selection itself. It was framed as procedural maintenance. No accusations, just clarification. Why had Elias chosen the queen? What precedent did it set? Did humanity intend to destabilize the coalition? Elias answered honestly. "Yes," he said, "but not the way you fear." The selection stood. News spread faster now. Across distant systems, lesser species began to copy human behavior. They asked more questions. They delayed agreements. They complied carefully instead of eagerly. The coalition felt the shift like a slow crack forming in solid ground. Queen Zyra received private messages from old allies. Some were angry, some were afraid. One message stood out. "You are breaking what we built." "We fight with what we have," Elias told her. "For us, that's thinking. Humanity will be reassigned a more suitable representative." When she returned to Elias, he saw the change in her posture. "They tried to separate us," he said. "Yes," she replied, "and they failed." Some species believed it, others doubted. Elias responded by releasing everything. All communications, all meetings, all documents, total transparency. The effect was immediate. The coalition had never operated in full light. Small species began to speak openly in council. Old grievances resurfaced. Questions that had been buried for centuries were asked aloud. The system strained. Queen Zyra stood beside Elias in the main chamber once more, watching the balance shift. "You knew this would happen," she said. "I hoped," he replied. The coalition did not collapse that day, but it bent. And once a system bends under truth, it never fully straightens again. Far beyond the council halls, across human space and alien worlds alike, a realization began to form. Humans did not need to conquer the galaxy. They only needed to show it itself. The breaking point did not come with alarms or war fleets. It arrived quietly during a regular council session that was meant to finalize routine trade updates. The chamber was full yet tense in a way Elia's rook had learned to recognize. Too calm, too careful. Queen Zyra stood beside him, no throne, no elevated platform. Just another representative, though everyone still felt the gravity she carried. The arbiter began the session with formal words, but something was different. More species than usual had requested speaking time. Small delegations, observers who rarely spoke, ones who usually stayed silent and voted the way they were told. Elias noticed Queen Zyra's eyes narrow slightly. The first speaker was from a minor aquatic world near the outer spiral. Their voice trembled, but they did not stop. "We request a review of our trade restrictions," the delegate said, "based on the same legal interpretations recently demonstrated by the human representative." Requests stacked up, reviews, clarifications, delays. The coalition's strength had always been its smooth operation. Decisions flowed downward. Resistance was isolated. Today, resistance was organized. The arbiter attempted to restore order. "These matters will be scheduled according to Procedural Rule 19, he said calmly. "Any request citing precedent must be addressed within the same session." They offered compromise. A motion was introduced to restore Queen Zyra's throne. Full authority, complete immunity. All she had to do was step away from the bond. Humanity would be reassigned. The pressure would end. The offer was made publicly, wrapped in respect and honor. Every eye turned to her. For a brief moment, she remembered what it felt like to sit above all others. To speak and be obeyed, to shape history with a gesture. Then she looked at Elias. He did not speak, he did not plead. He stood quietly, hands at his sides, ready to accept whatever came next. That more than anything decided her. "I decline," Queen Zyra said. The word echoed. "I will not return to a throne built on silence," she continued. "If the coalition cannot function without fear, then it must change." Species that had never spoken directly to one another began exchanging messages. Elias worked constantly. He answered questions, shared data, explained human logic again and again. He grew tired, but he did not slow down. Queen Zyra worked beside him, translating not just language but culture. She explained alien fear to humans and human stubbornness to aliens. Together they became something new, not rulers, not rebels, anchors. The final crisis came when a block of dominant species attempted to override the council entirely. They declared an emergency authority, citing instability caused by human interference. The declaration was legal, barely. Elias read it once, then again. "They missed something," he said. Queen Zyra leaned closer. "What?" Emergencies were supposed to end when obedience returned. The system stalled. In that pause, everything changed. Trade slowed. Commands went unanswered. Smaller species stopped waiting for approval. They acted within the law but on their own terms. The emergency authority collapsed under its own uncertainty. When the council reconvened, it was no longer the same body. Reform was proposed. Not by humans, not by Queen Zyra, by the coalition itself. It was not perfect, systems never were, but it was open, transparent, accountable. Queen Zyra was offered her throne again, this time with genuine respect. She refused again. "I will serve," she said, "but not above." Only voice and veto when systems drifted toward quiet cruelty. Elias returned to Earth weeks later. He was greeted not as a conqueror but as something stranger. A reminder, humanity's status changed quietly. No grand announcement, no declaration of dominance, just a new understanding. Humans were not weak. They were dangerous in a way the galaxy had never prepared for. Because when given a system, humans did not ask how to win it. They asked how it worked. And once they understood it, they changed it. Far away, Queen Zyra stood in the council chamber, watching voices rise and fall, arguments clash and resolve. It was louder now, messier, more alive. She thought of the moment Elias had pointed at her throne and made an impossible choice. A choice that had not been about her at all. It had been about belief, that no system was beyond question, and that sometimes the bravest act was not to choose power,